Hey kid, and welcome to KidTime StoryTime, where we have a special magical Black History story today.
Oh no, if a bus could talk? Hey, listen, if it says anything, I did not steal the cheese. It happened to be on the floor, and I was merely picking it up to throw it away inside my mouth.
I don't think it's that kind of bus, White Rat. Okay, he's gone. Anyway, by Faith Ringgold. Ringgold, that's an interesting name. It caught my eye. It's a very old name, and there are actually a bunch of towns all over the U.S. named Ringgold. I've actually been in one in Georgia. Now, the writer dedicated this to all the people, men, women, kids, of the civil rights movement. You'll see this is an extra long book, so I'll be swaying a little back and forth. Don't get dizzy. Don't get dizzy. All right, you ready? Here we go. This morning, a strange-looking bus pulled up at my stop. It didn't look anything like my usual bus. Oh, that is a very unusual-looking bus. Take a look at that. It seems to have a hat and red hair. Maybe it's related to me. And it has a nose and looks like it's a lady bus. Is that lipstick on the bus? Well, it didn't look anything like my usual bus, but it was on time, and I didn't want to be late for school, so I decided to take it. The door opened, and a voice called out, "Step on up, young lady." I got on thinking, I'll ask the driver which bus this is. And off the bus goes. You see all the people in the bus? All right. But the driver was not in his seat. Oh, is it a male? I could have sworn it had lipstick on. Well, I paid my fare and looked around for him. Well, he isn't there. There were lots of passengers, but their faces weren't familiar. Well, let's see. Did you recognize anybody? Okay. Oh, this sounded a little scary. I started to ask one of them if I was on the right bus, but before I could, the door closed, and the bus pulled away from the curb with no one in the driver's seat. The sudden start sent me reeling down the aisle, and I landed in a seat, clunk, holding on for dear life. None of the other passengers seemed to notice anything was wrong, which is crazy because there is no one driving this bus. Hello, everyone. "Stop this bus and let me off," I shouted. "I want a bus with a driver." That doesn't seem like too much to ask. Please don't take that seat, Marcy," someone said. "Well, how do you know my name? Which one of you is speaking?" I asked, looking around. But the passengers were just talking amongst themselves or reading or staring out the window. "This is a special bus, Marcy, and you are sitting in a special seat reserved for a very special person." "Amen, amen," chorused the passengers. "Well, what bus is this?" "Well, this used to be the Cleveland Avenue bus, but now it's the Rosa Parks bus. She is the patron saint of the civil rights movement. One day a year, we reserve that seat in her name. Take another seat, and I will tell you all about her." Now, the voice seemed to be coming from the bus itself. I could hardly believe it. I was on a talking bus. I mean, that sounds like an amazing story to tell at recess, that's for sure. Trembling with fear, but curious as I could be, I took a seat across the aisle and settled down to hear this remarkable story. All right, and just making sure you can see everything on my extra wide book. Yes, you can. Moving on. Rosie Macaulay, the first child of James and Leona Macaulay, was born on February 4th, 1913 in Tuskegee, Alabama. When Rosa was 2 years old, her father, a skilled carpenter and a house builder, left the family and went up north looking for work. Her mother took Rosa and Sylvester, her baby brother, to live on their grandfather's small farm in Pine Level, Alabama. Oh, they went to live on Grandpa's farm. That sounds lovely. They worked hard there. Oh, never mind. I guess they had to work the farm, which is still lovely, but it's also work. They raised chickens, calves, vegetables, nuts, and fruit. Rosa helped her grandfather clear weeds and tend the crops. The family also picked cotton in neighboring fields. Because back then, kids, everybody had to work. People, even kids, had jobs. And it's just like, well, it's kind of like you doing chores around the house. She was doing chores around the the farm, which actually included raising her own food. From Rosa's earliest childhood, she could remember scary nights when the Ku Klux Klan, a band of hateful white men dressed in white hooded robes, would ride past their farm, shooting off rifles to frighten the black people. Rosa knew that the Klan had burned churches and beaten and tortured and lynched many black people. There were times when Rosa's family slept in their clothes so they could run off if the Klan decided to burn their house in the middle of the night. These were dangerous times, very dangerous times. Despite these fearful conditions, and fearful indeed they were, Rosa's grandfather was an outspoken old man, there he must be right there, who made it known that he had a loaded shotgun and was not afraid to use it to defend his home and family. Grandfather Sylvester instilled a sense of pride in his children and grandchildren, and in Rosa most of all. Rosa was a nice little girl who loved praise, but she hated the disrespectful way whites often treated black people. One day, a white boy threatened to punch her, and Rosa picked up a rock and threatened to hit him back if he did. When her grandmother heard about this, she was very afraid because she knew that something like that might cause Rosa to be lynched one day. Lynching was horrible, and that happened back then too. When Rosa was 6 years old, she went to school. Her school had 50 to 60 children in one room and only one teacher. Wow, can you imagine a class that big, kid? That's huge. In Pine Level, Alabama, school for black children only went up to the 6th grade, and it was only open 5 months out of the year, while school for white children went through the 12th grade and was open for 9 months. Oh, that's half as much time. They'd only have half as much time to learn the school year and half as many years to learn. And the white children could take a bus to school, while the black children often had to walk a long way. However, Rosa's mother, Leona, had plans for Rosa's education. Leona was a teacher in a one-room school in the village of Spring Hill. To teach there, she had to travel a long distance and then be away from her children all week. But she saved up so Rosa could further her education. When Rosa was 11, she went to Miss White's School for Girls in Montgomery, Alabama. Several years later, I guess that must be her right there going to school because it's the same dress. See? There she is in school. Several years later, Rosa went on to high school at Alabama State Teachers College for Negroes. She had to drop out of school when her grandmother, and then her mother became ill. Rosa's mama got well, but her grandmother later died. Those are tough things that little Rosa had to go through, and so young, too. Let's see, can we see everything? Yes, we can. And wow, this bus has so much knowledge. Okay, going on our magical bus ride through the life of Rosa Parks. After Leona recovered, Rosa went back to school and got her high school diploma. But it would be a few years before Rosa could find a job using her typing and writing skills. So she took in sewing and did alterations at the Montgomery Fair department store. Ooh, Montgomery Fair, that used to be a very big, popular department store. It exists no more. One day, on the way home from work, the bus driver told Rosa to get off and enter at the back of the bus after she had paid her fare. Then he drove off, leaving her in the street. This was a common practice back then. It's no wonder that black people would often walk a mile or more to and from work rather than ride the segregated buses. Look at that. Everybody on the bus looks shocked because they saw her pay and then saw the guy drive off. The buses were the worst form of segregation because black people could only sit in the back of the bus. If there were no whites in the middle section, blacks could sit there, but only if no white people were left standing. Black people couldn't sit in the same row with whites, even if there was an empty seat in that row. It was during those times that I got to know and love Rosa Parks, said the talking bus. She was a great lady with quiet dignity, despite all the cruelty she faced because of the color of her skin. Wow, that is very admirable, because when times are tough, that is when your character comes out and her true grace really shown. I'm just making it a little closer so you can follow along. But then, something good happened. Rosa married a a very nice man named Raymond Parks. Parks, as she called him, was a black man like Grandfather Sylvester, and he demanded to be treated with respect. Now, Parks, as you can see right here yourself, Parks was a light-skinned fella and had grown up in an all-white neighborhood. Although he actually looked like a white person, he was not allowed to go to the white school, and the nearest black school was too far away. So he had been taught to read and write by his mama. Despite the fact that he had very little formal education, Parks was well-spoken and well-read on the important issues affecting his people. And can I just say right here as a storyteller that you can read and make yourself even smarter. You don't only get smart in school, kid. You actually, can do it yourself too. This guy had to because he couldn't go to school. You go to school, but you can actually get even smarter by reading brilliant material like on KidTimeStoryTime. But we go back to our book. Parks was well-spoken and well-read on the important issues affecting his people. It was Parks who encouraged Rosa to return to school and graduate. Raymond Parks, a barber by trade, had been a long-time member of the NAACP. Hey, you've heard of that, haven't you? That means the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Mrs. Parks soon became a member too, and in no time she was appointed secretary of the Montgomery branch and could use her education to help people. And she served as a youth leader and organized citywide youth conferences, and she worked hard to free 4 young men called the Scottsboro Boys. Ooh, the Scottsboro Boys, I've heard about this. They were jailed for a crime they did not commit. Now, Parks, that's the fella right here, was also an activist for voter registration, and he and Rosa held regular meetings of the Voters League in their home. That's how Rosa finally registered to vote, after being turned down 3 times before. Oh, the right to vote, that's a big one. Okay, I'm opening up the book again. Super extra wide book. I'm going to have to scoochies, okay? One fateful day, December 1st, 1955. Remember that date. It's an important date. Mrs. Parks took this very bus home from work. The bus driver, whose name was James Blake, told Mrs. Parks to get up and give her seat to a white man. There were other black people sitting in the same section, and all of them would have to get up so that the white man could sit down. Rosa knew that the segregation laws were unfair, and right there and then, she decided to do something about it. She told the driver she would not give up her seat. This was the same bus driver who had wronged her before. Remember when she paid her money and then went to the back and then he drove off before she could get back in through the back door? Look at that. She's looking shocked. She's just looking away. He's like smiling a little bit like, I can't believe I'm witnessing this. When Mrs. Parks refused to give up her seat, Blake called the police and had her arrested and taken to jail for breaking the segregation laws. So she stood up for herself by sitting. Isn't that interesting? It is for this singular act of courage that one day a year Mrs. Parks' seat has been reserved, said the talking bus. And while we don't want to see Blake driving this bus ever again, amen, amen, chorused the passengers. Well, how long did Mrs. Parks have to stay in jail? Not long, Marcy. When Mr. Ed Nixon, or E.D., I called him Ed, I think it's E.D. When Mr. E.D. Nixon, the head of the Montgomery branch of the NAACP, heard of Mrs. Parks' arrest, he paid her bail and she was released. He asked her to help with a boycott to change the segregation laws, and Rosa was happy to be part of a citywide effort to end segregated buses. Mr. E.D. Nixon also asked the Women's Political Council and the town's black ministers to help organize and promote what came to be known the whole world over as the Montgomery bus boycott. So basically, this fella right here, he reached out, did the networking, got on Facebook. I'm kidding. There was no Facebook. But he got out there, got on the phone, walked, knocked on doors, and got a lot of support for this boycott, for this, for the Montgomery bus boycott. One of the ministers was the pastor at the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, a young man you may have heard of. His name was Dr. Martin Luther King. Well, Mr. Nixon here asked Mr. King to lead the boycott because he was new to town and he had great promise. Maybe you've heard. The Dexter Avenue Baptist Church drew a large crowd that night, and Dr. King told the people all about the boycott. Look at that, full. Look at that, standing room only. Even the balcony seats are all taken. Let's see. This was the beginning of Dr. King's leadership in the civil rights movement and the beginning of his many memorable speeches. On this day, Dr. King said, "We are tired of being segregated and humiliated, tired of being kicked about by the brutal feet of oppression." For 381 days, that is more than a year, Black people in Montgomery either walked or arranged their own carpools instead of taking those buses. Without the Black passengers, the buses were almost empty and the city was losing a lot of cha-ching. The Montgomery boycott was working. "Amen, amen," said the passengers. "We know. We were there." No, that makes sense. But as a result of the boycott, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was arrested and his home was bombed. Told you, those times were dangerous. Many others were arrested too and threatened with hateful letters, phone calls, and bombings. The Montgomery bus boycott was the beginning of a national movement in which people of every race organized protests against segregation in their own towns. See, so the movement started spreading to all people all over the country. The boycott spread to department stores where Black people were not allowed to return articles of clothing they had bought or to try on clothes before buying them. Well then, if you can't try it on, and you can't try it on at home to return it if it doesn't fit, that's just not right. You mean Miss Rosa Parks could not try on a pair of shoes or return a dress that did not fit? I asked. Yes, Marcy. I know it's difficult for young people today to understand what life was like under segregation laws. There were eat-ins, too, where Black people and white sympathizers would sit at for whites-only lunch counters and have food poured over their heads by the crowds. Wow. Look at that. Food poured on their heads. But look at that, they're sitting to stand up for their rights. But there was no sadder sight on a hot summer day than Black children outside a public swimming pool displaying "for whites only" signs. I'm so glad that those days are behind us. Mrs. Parks' case finally reached the highest court in our land, and on November 13th, 1956, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that segregation on public buses was against the law. Woo! A little more than a month later, the boycott ended, and Black people no longer had to ride in the back of the bus. But the struggle for equal rights was not over just yet. Rosa lost her $25 a week job at the Montgomery Fair department store, and she continued to receive threatening calls and letters. Well, but she won a major fight. She can get another job anywhere else, but rights, that's what lasts forever. A year later, Rosa and Raymond Parks moved to Detroit, where Rosa worked for Congressman John Conyers of Michigan. There, she was able to help homeless people find decent housing, jobs, and community services. Look at that! I told you, the rights, that's the thing that stays with you. So she lost her job, got a better job. Look at that, she has an office job, she's using her typing skills like she learned in school. Well, Mrs. Parks' struggles for equal rights continued. On August 28, 1963, at Dr. King's March on Washington, Rosa Parks was honored with a Tribute to Women Award by Philip Randolph. However, she was not asked to speak. I wonder why. I guess it's because this guy right here, MLK himself, he had the big speech of the day. And do you see what this is right here? That is the Lincoln Memorial. That's where they did it, on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. Later, when Rosa heard on the radio that Dr. King had been shot, Rosa wept in her mama's arms. Well, it didn't happen that same day, by the way. It happened later on. They just did a sudden jump there, but they didn't want you to get confused. Many tributes and awards have been given to this gentle, courageous woman. A bronze bust of Mrs. Rosa Parks is installed at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. She was awarded the Spring-On Medal, the MLK Nonviolent Peace Prize, the Eleanor Roosevelt Woman of Courage Award, and the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Mrs. Parks has received countless honorary degrees and plaques and honors her for a valiant act of courage and unceasing dedication to freedom. But what is this old bus? But what this old bus is proudest of is that Cleveland Avenue, the street this bus ran on, has been renamed. You see what it's renamed to? Rosa Parks Boulevard. In addition to all this, once a year, we get together to celebrate the great lady's birthday. Amen, amen, said the passengers. We know, we were there. And just like that, the bus stopped. And Mrs. Parks herself got on. All the passengers stood up to meet her, and she greeted them by name. Parks, her husband. Edie Nixon, her lawyer. Dr. King, the preacher. And the rest. I remembered them from her story. The once unfamiliar passengers, well, they now had faces that I would never forget. I'm so excited to meet you, Mrs. Parks, I said gleefully. You really are the mother of the civil rights movement, and I'm so lucky to be here on this magic bus. May I ask, what gave you such a strong belief in freedom? Well, my belief in freedom goes way back to the days when my mother used to sing the old Negro spiritual. Oh, freedom over me, said Mrs. Parks. Let's sing it together. Oh, I don't know this one. Oh, freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom over me. And before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Now, it's time for you to cut your birthday cake, Mrs. Parks, said the talking bus. Mrs. Parks closed her eyes. Happy birthday, Mrs. Parks, said the passengers, and may our dreams of freedom and equal opportunity for all people continue to come true. We love you and we thank you for being the lady who, by sitting down, inspired people all over the world to stand up for freedom. Amen, amen. We know. We were there. By the time the talking bus had reached my school, my head was crammed full of all the things that had just happened. When I got up this morning, little did I know that I would be attending Mrs. Parks' birthday party, riding a magical bus. Wow, I cannot wait to tell my class about this. The end. If a bus could talk. How about that? A little ride through history. A big, long ride through history. And now we know everything that she went through to become who she became. Just a regular girl who stood up at the perfect moment in history to help change everything and make the world a better place. And that, kid, is what I want you to do. To do what you can to keep making the world a better place.
Hey,
Yes, White Rat?
wait, did it mention anything about the cheese or anything like that, right?
No, not a word about any cheese.
Okay, just want to make sure.
See you next time, kid, on Kid Time
Story time.